And I'm
Is there
forgetting.
yeah. Anyone else in particular you think we're waiting on, Marilyn?
No, just no. Yeah, maybe we should go ahead and start.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just kick it off. I think we do have a good agenda here today. So I'll let Marilyn go over that, but I will just say a couple of things real quick. We had a good meeting, I thought, earlier this week with John, me, Marilyn, and Dave Woodson. We talked a little bit about some of the discussion we had about the linkage with the Environmental Stewardship Committee. And I think that's important work moving forward. John, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but we're basically going to launch a subcommittee to take a look at the Environmental Stewardship Committee role and charter and the old executive order, and link up with Margaret Shepard at some point, who is working on a university-wide review of all executive orders to kind of reestablish or recodify how we govern committees and that sort of thing. So I think our initiative and John's initiative and leadership in particular, with his experience on the history of the Environmental Stewardship Committee, will go a long way. I think it'll be very welcomed by Margaret. But we're looking to launch that effort, and it'll certainly involve some of this group and others as we move forward to really try to put some teeth behind it from a governance standpoint and explain the role. It aligns a little bit with the definition of sustainability initiative that we have that's going on right now. But looking forward to that work moving forward. Real quickly on the definition of sustainability, I met, as I briefed previously, I think, with Anna Mari. She's generally in favor and in agreement. She had some really good questions about the process, and I think we had a really good process that I was able to explain to her. I am on tap to brief, well, I'm not scheduled yet, but I'm looking to get scheduled in March to brief Board of Deans and Chancellors as maybe a last step in getting the President's endorsement on an official definition of sustainability. So more to come on that soon. But John, I don't know if you want to add anything to.
I think that what you is everything, but the key thing that came up at the last Environmental Stewardship Committee meeting was, what is our charter? What is our responsibility? And who do we report to? And it's kind of murky. And so getting that clarified as to exactly how the Environmental Stewardship Committee fits in the governance of the institution, I think is pretty important.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, John. I don't know if there's any questions on that. If not, I'll kick it over to you, Marilyn. We've got 11 now, but you want to take us through today's agenda?
Yeah. Now we have 3 items. One is to review some recommendations that we have below. Oh, and I'll just pause to reflect that, you know, this meeting is not one of our typical meetings, because rather than focusing on individual targets, we decided to pause and take some time to reflect, or to be strategic, I guess, about the EC. So the first agenda item is looking at some of these suggestions for how we tweak the meeting purpose, and then some time to talk about how to focus on targets that we think we can make some real impact on. And then finally, we'll have the last half will be Brian's chance to move us forward with the carbon roadmap concept. So we sent these recommendations out in advance, but I'm going to go ahead and just pause for a minute to give everyone a chance to read through them, and then we can have any discussion.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think as folks are finishing that, I'll just add some color there. We're interested in kind of tweaking based on our experience the last year plus now in this body, how we govern ourselves and how we try to leverage the experience and expertise of this group. So I think we welcome folks' thoughts on these recommendations and other ideas on what's working well, what can be improved. I think we've captured a couple here that I think are useful, but appreciate the group's thoughts.
Mhm, mhm. And I'm going to go ahead and do what's suggested in one of them and actually go around, not to put anyone on the spot, but be sure everyone gets an opportunity to weigh in if they want. And let's see, I'll tap Steve because I see your window is highlighted. Is there anything you wanted to reflect on?
Well, I was thinking about the first one and the reporting via email, which I think is a good idea. I was wondering if that was, this is maybe not the right phrasing, but is that almost too small? Is there a greater visibility that, and I acknowledge this is easy for me to say, and somebody else does it, but is there some sort of dashboard that could be created that is always visible to a wider audience, not just this audience, that helps tell the story of how we're doing and supports the meeting also, but has an additional and maybe large or bigger purpose and audience. But taking it at face value, I do think the spending time reporting in the meeting, I think we all agree, is not very productive.
Well, going off of that, Steve, just a little bit. So we do put all of the reports on our website, on like our dashboard. So everyone in the university, if they so too pleased, and wanted to see all this, they can go and access it. It's more just like the purpose for like, these meetings that we would just email out a report instead of always having presentations.
Okay, so shame on me for not knowing that.
Nope, you're okay. That wasn't well articulated earlier. So don't be too hard on yourself.
Seriously, yeah.
But I think it's also a good idea. I mean, if we do that more intentionally, make sure it's perhaps a little more accessible than it is, and point the EC members to it is a way to make it truly functional and functioning.
Yeah,
I think there's room for that. Yeah. Steve, you want to? Oh, Anne, you look like you're ready to jump in.
Well, I don't want to, I know Steve needs to reflect on the rest, but I would say, I would hope that if anybody needed to do two things regarding report outs, that they would still do two things, and that is celebrate progress or escalate barriers. So I guess the thing I worry about I'll call it burying reports, is that sometimes if they aren't actively discussed, if they're barriers to progress, or if there are things we need to celebrate, those don't get brought to the fore. So I just hope if we move to a more passive report out structure, that people would still be invited to share successes or escalate barriers or concerns.
Yeah, and I don't think that's contrary to or inconsistent with the reporting by email or reference to a dashboard or however we do it. It just reserves the meeting time or more meeting time for the elevation or the celebration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as far as what we don't want to lose, though, I do think there's probably a function there that people like reporting out their progress. People are doing a lot of good work, and I think there is some usefulness of us just listening and complimenting people on progress made. So I want to keep that. The part I feel like, this is restating what Ann already said, I think, but what I've noticed is people will tell you where they're making progress and where they're not, but there's not good connection to actually are we meeting or not meeting the goal? And what would it take to meet the goal? So if we can just kind of accent with people the importance of focusing on what is the status of meeting the goal and what is the barrier to meeting the goal, as opposed to just a report out on all the good work that they're doing.
Yeah, I'll jump in with some reinforcement there. I think the metrics on the measure of are we making progress, are we not? The extent to which we can make that visible and available and recognize it, you know, we're stuck in the mud or we are making progress, that will drive highlighting what the barriers are. Because we'll ask questions, well, why are we stuck in the mud? What's the problem there? And we will talk in these meetings with this talent about how to overcome obstacles.
Tony, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I really like the meetings themselves, and I really like that they have the podium to go ahead and talk about how come they are stuck in the mud. The tough thing about, you know, putting this on a dashboard, it's either, you're going from number 1 to 100 and you're not there yet. Again, there's nothing in between, you know, a lot of times, you know, did they meet their target? Are they going to meet their target? And this gives them a little bit of an opportunity to explain that they're between 1 and 100, they're maybe on 25, and then here's the reasons why. So sometimes, you know, there has to be some intermediate goals there. Otherwise, it looks like they're not doing anything because they haven't met the target yet. So it does give them that podium to go ahead and explain, you know, where they're at, because they may not have met the goal all the way, but they can't click yes either. So sometimes those dashboards are a little bit misleading that way. I like this reserving the time for discussion about strategy and process, though. So thank you for that. I think that that's going to be a great thing. And then also these particular areas of interest or the talent that's out there, you know, of the professors that are doing really fantastic work and how they can be better utilized. I think that's very, very good. Thank you.
Ricky, did you have anything you wanted to comment on?
No, in general, I agree. I especially like having time at the meetings to think more at a high level about strategy, and then certainly of reviewing and vetting proposals and things like that that will be going to board of deans or the president and provost. At least for my, you know, what I might be able to provide is probably more at a higher level. Know a bit about this subject, about this area, but not nearly to the extent that the rest of you all know about this work.
Rod, did you have anything to jump in on?
No, just taking it all in.
Let's see. Who else? James?
Sure. I agree with everybody saying. I think that turning, reorient to these meetings to make sure that what we're doing is not just doing a check off of stuff, but more using this time to think through what we need to get some group think on, I think is a good time to make sure we're setting aside time for that and trying to keep the other sort of, just reporting out sort of thing to a minimum. So I think leaving this to the problems to be discussed or things to be brainstormed, I think that's a better way to use this time.
Marilyn, were there thoughts on how I guess it is now the fifth bullet, determining the agenda based on need? Like how does that happen? Is that you with John and Lou ahead of time, or what's the mechanics of that?
My initial my initial thought when I wrote this was that it could come from the action owners. If they're like, here we have something we'd really like to talk to the EC about. And then I think John might have, I think it could go both ways.
Well,
But
I
yeah,
think my thought was, getting back to what Ann said, that if there's impediments that need to be addressed, and if there's successes that need to be celebrated, I think that then that would come from your interaction with the owners of those individual actions. But if the report is, well, we're still moving on, we haven't done much in these areas, that doesn't contribute much. We can't contribute, I guess, much to that conversation. There could be specific areas where members of the EAC want to know about a specific issue. So I think it could come from membership of this group, but it could come from the action owners themselves who have issues they want some advice on how to overcome the barriers, or they want to tell us, what they've really done. And I think in both cases, that's good. We need that input from them. All too often, my observation is we get this 2 or 3 page report, and then we spend time talking about that, when we should read that and then just talk about some major issues that need to be addressed.
I do also want to mention that in the reports, when each action owner is filling out, they do discuss like some of their accomplishments and their challenges. And then even on the last page of the report, when they're filling it out themselves, it's the survey that we send out. And on the last page, we have room for questions specifically for each of these different categories. So for the EC, the ESC, and then even our office. So we were kind of hoping to utilize that in a bigger way, in a sense of, especially when we're trying to set these agendas, seeing what each of the action owners need, noticing some of their accomplishments or some of their really big barriers, and seeing whether or not it's appropriate to bring that to the EC or talk to the action owners individually, but then also taking into account some of the questions that they've already addressed, specifically on that last page of their survey. And if it's a really important issue that we need the action owner present at the meeting, we would invite them in or something like that. So we don't want to minimize their barriers or their accomplishments. We want to elevate those as much as possible, so the action owners feel validated, but then the EC or any of the committees do the appropriate action to address them. So by no means are we trying to minimize anything, but just trying to find another fluid way to show you all what's going on, but having active conversations to push the committee a little bit further with what we do know. And so we're actually meeting some of these targets. Hopefully that kind of clarifies some things there, or things that the committee did not already know, but yeah.
Okay, well, in interest of moving the agenda along, and certainly feel free to send more feedback, but we'll move to make these changes, keeping in mind all of your ideas. Okay, our next item was this idea of identifying targets we can expect to have some level of achievement on. And John was suggesting it would have been nice to actually list those here. Don't have that information right now. And John, do you want to speak to this? In terms of, does this mean we're letting go of some that aren't making good progress, or that we just want to really focus on some to push forward more action?
Well, what I thought is, it's now January. We have to provide a report of what we've achieved by the end of June. That's 6 months from now. And we ought to go through all of these actions we have identified, and where do we think we're going to make some significant progress? And let's focus on those where the action owner needs some help in overcoming some obstacles, or we're seeing that these are things that we can achieve, so we can tell the community this is what was achieved as a consequence of our sustainability action plan for this year. And that then becomes the foundation for what we hope to do in the coming year, which will have to produce in June to be issued in July.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, I think this comes down to what we were talking about earlier on how to govern these meetings and focus on things that are most useful.
Mhm.
So between now and June, what are the things that we want to focus on? Because we think our efforts in these meetings and outside of these meetings will help further progress that has impact.
Mhm. Any other thoughts along those lines?
Maybe a question, I guess, for us. Marilyn, do you think we could have talked about this previously, maybe, but I wonder if we want to take a stab at looking at the 10 targets and trying to do a straw man. Hey, here's what we think are the things that are most useful to focus on. Maybe you and others have 2 or 3 ideas in particular in your hip pocket that we can talk about right now, but we've got a limited amount of time also today.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I tried to do that a little bit mentally and got a little bit stuck. I mean, the one that jumps out is target 10, just because David Woodson is on board and going big guns. Plus, in June, we have to submit to the state a description of all that we've done in the last 2 years to meet our greenhouse gas goals and an overview of what we're going to do next. So that's this group could be, it should be at some level part of that process. So that one deserves focus. Christoph, did you have a thought along these lines?
Yeah, those are great, Marilyn. I was even thinking of those additional ones aside from the actions, but kind of directly to your point, Lou, there's 2 targets which have a 2022, completion date. So those should certainly be the ones at the very least that we're focused on. So the first one being target 2, 1 UW-wide sustainability framework by 2022, which includes the definition, but a number of other actions. And then the other one is target 4, a comprehensive equitable purchasing target by 2022. So both of those are ones that we should expect some sort of substantive report out and completion of that goal or reevaluation of that target. So yeah, those come to mind.
I think those are not hard either. I hesitated to use the word easy. I do think we can do something there without too much effort, working with the action owners, and they should establish, hey, here's what the plan is, and here's how we're going to get there. I think we've made great progress on definition of sustainability. I know there are other items, but that's on track. As long as we just get through Board of Deans and Chancellors, and then we get an official endorsement from the president, and then we're checking a block, which I think is something we should celebrate. The one that Marilyn addresses, target 10, really resonates with me, and I would agree with her that there's opportunity for impact, and we really need to huddle with Dave Woodson, and he's huddling with us already, and has some very deliberate plans. And I think he's feeling quite empowered based on the discussions that we've had. So I think we can get some meat on that bone as well. Green Revolving Fund is one as well. We ought to have very deliberate plans for now getting across the finish line on briefing that. So I think that's another easy one where that takes a bit of work still, and it's still an uphill climb, but if we can get across the finish line on that one, I think that's a huge thing to celebrate.
Yeah.
I think we can do the brief well before June. Whether or not we'll have approval before June, it would be great. But I expect that there'll be some more analysis that's asked for that we might have to circle back with.
One more question just to bring up, and sorry to jump back to my previous comment, Lou, after you just commented, but something that comes to mind to ask this group is, what happens when the target has achieved its goal, right? So 2022, we achieve our target, let's say. Is it just implementation of that target for the additional 3 years, or, does it mean that that target will now be modified to reflect the completion of that goal? So I think that's something for, this group in the Sustainability Office to discuss, and also discuss with action owners.
Yeah, I'm looking at targets 8 and 10. When we achieve carbon neutrality, maybe the goal changes to maintain carbon neutrality, and that sort of thing. I just think we move on. We're at a different spot once we make progress on something, and the goal either changes or it goes away and something else replaces it, or we focus on 9 goals instead of 10 goals, because that's what is important for us to work on. I love that question, though. I mean, we should have some thoughts on not if, but when we accomplish things.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of recalibrating is a healthy one relative to what's next, and that recalibration should be a built-in, because we certainly have a long journey in this arena.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Anne. Thanks for emphasizing that. I think our process, it is built in, basically, with the annual action items every year. We huddle and revise the actions based on the progress we've made, and it's a new action plan each fiscal year.
Great. We're at 1:59, so why don't we go ahead and transition to Brian's report.
Just share my screen, Marilyn, I assume.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, are people seeing the carbon plan agenda up?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. So just to get your brains re-going on this, since we haven't talked since November, I came at that meeting. We had our first conversation about what we're kind of loosely calling a carbon roadmap. And Lou, you weren't able to make that meeting. I did give you a debrief, but just as a reminder, the goal here, think of the goal in one way. It's if you, Lou, got stopped by a regent or the president and said, hey, how the heck is UW going to meet that 2050 goal of essentially carbon neutrality? You would have an answer in terms of, well, our plan is X. And currently we lack that. We've got a lot of great work going on, and we think we know how we're getting there, but we can't really point to anything that sort of says, here's our path. So we started this conversation about how to get there at the November meeting, and what you all, I'm just facilitating the conversation. What I heard from you all was, yes, you were comfortable with this group being the forum for creation of a plan to be obviously reviewed and worked on by lots of other places, but kind of a formulation could occur in this group. That you all agreed that for purposes of state reporting against the 2050 goal, we would just look at scope 1 and 2. We would have university goals for scope 3, but those would not be part of our state reporting framework. You wanted to see more information on campus level targets and data to see, well, are we managing this at the university as a whole, or are we trying to get carbon targets for each campus? And then there was an interest in adding procurement potentially as scope 3 procurement impacts, carbon footprint procurement potentially as a scope 3. So that was the summary of our first conversation. So today I just wanted to do 2 things, which is update you on some information I got related to campus level carbon output. But mainly I'd love to get some initial thoughts on kind of how we get our hands around the carbon plan. The last time we tried this, there's probably some people on the phone who were very involved in this, but in 2017, there was a working group that came up with a report with these target areas. I guess there were 7 of them. And that was the thinking of the group at this point about the initiatives that we were going to pursue in order to get to near carbon neutrality. So they were, the obvious one on the power plant, lab efficiency, server relocation, virtualization, etc. And then there's very interesting little, like 2 sentences on the report. Marilyn probably knows the history of this, or others. It was, Roll was kind of very politically correct. He was sort of basically saying, at this time, it's been decided not to pursue, further action on this plan, or some kind of very indirect language. So it looked to me like, for political reasons, somehow that implementation of that framework got stalled. And so my question to the group is, if we're trying to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, we're obviously got to break it into bite-sized chunks. We know the biggest bite is carbon, the conversion of the power plant. And we know the likely other chunks are electrifying the fleet and energy efficiency. But how do we want to sort of break it up into pieces so that we can start to establish our overall strategies in these areas? Do we want to pick it up where the 2017 group left off? Do we want to kind of start over again? So what are people's thoughts about how to organize our strategies related to that 2050 goal?
Yeah, we still have that. We had that MAC. What was that stand for? Anyway, that thing, that chart that Rule had created that looked at all the suggested actions and what their carbon emission impacts would be. We still have that somewhere, and we seem to have just set it aside and then picked up our new sustainability action plan. But that was a very
What was that called? I know what you're talking about, Marilyn. I like that a lot. It basically said here, that was a great plan. We should dust that off. That I would reinforce that. It basically said, hey, here's how much carbon is being used, and there was a cost for all of these things.
Yes.
And there was risk associated with all of them. Yeah, I think, Brian, that might be a start. I didn't know anything about this 2017 effort, but I think that's good to know too. We should dust that off, and that other tool that Marilyn addressed.
Oh, yes, we renamed it the Climate Action Inventory there. Damon provided the link to it. And you can click through those bars at the top.
You want to share what you're looking at there, Marilyn?
Oh, sorry. Damon put the link in the chat, but it's this page. Like I said, it was the MAC and we renamed it the Carbon Action Inventory. Here's a list of them, sort of in text form. And then this is a diagram where the size of the box is proportional to the amount of carbon they could reduce, and then the color is proportional to the cost per milligram. So pale and big is good, or milligram, megagram, I guess. And then this was just different representations. In this case, colored by whether it's the power plant, building efficiency, or other. Same data, colored based on who the owner is, facilities, provost, etc. What was this? Oh, this last one was the traditional MAC view. I'm trying to remember what this display is called, where the height of the bar indicates the cost per ton of reduction, and the width of the bar indicates the magnitude of the impact. And you can hover over these and get more information.
So Marilyn, did that get endorsed? What was the sort of status of that as a work plan?
Yeah, we I don't know that it had a formal status. We kept sort of wrestling with it and trying to figure out how to use it. I think that's why it kind of fell off. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it really went anywhere, but it was really good work. And the discussions I remember having were, hey, each one of these boxes should have an action plan. And some of them are, we're not going to do anything right now because it's way too expensive and the impact is relatively insignificant. But if you look at the things that have big impact, and certainly the ones that are cheaper, they become no-brainers and we need to move forward on it. So I think it becomes part of the strategy. And I think, again, targets 8 and 10 are the ones that address this. So I think our sustainability action plan targets, we can review them again, but that's, I think we've covered that demand in the targets, and we just need to prioritize action on this one.
Marilyn, this was managed out of the sustainability office?
Yes, I mean, I was the one who did this visualization, if that's what you mean.
And when was the last time it was sort of touched in terms of a status and work plan issue? How long has it been?
Really good question. Damon, do you happen to know? Probably was at that time frame. 5 more years.
I can at least find out when it was added to our website, which is probably.
I mean, it's been a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Marilyn?
Yeah, I think, I think it's been, the only reason I would put my 2 cents in about it is that when I took the role in transportation, that was 5 years ago, I had specific questions, Marilyn, if you remember, where you went around to various units and asked, how are you going to implement this? So I think it's right around 5 years relative to when this was actionable, where I was asked questions about the UPass program. I was asked questions about how are we promoting remote work? And asked questions about electrifying the fleet. And I was asked to give specific answers of actions that were being taken in those areas. So that was a long conversation in 2017.
I'm noticing on this front page, we actually said it was 2019 that we renamed it the Carbon Action Inventory. So
yeah,
that it seemed longer ago. Yeah,
it was just pre the SAP.
Yeah, pre SAP. Tony, you had a question?
No, it was more a statement. I remember when all of this came up and Rule was working with us, and this is when it transitioned, when everybody, got the big aha of how much this was all going to cost. That's when the University of Washington felt that maybe we should get off our high horse and really try to figure out how much it would cost to go ahead and buy our way out instead of doing all this work. Then we had our meeting, and that's when Brian was part of the committee to go ahead and try to go out to bid or go out for interest to see how much it would actually cost to buy our way out. So that's where the transition went.
Tony, when you say buy our way out, you mean through credits purchasing?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Originally, back in the day, the UW would have nothing to do with buying credits or doing anything like that. They felt, University of Washington felt that they're going to be true to it and then just get all this done. And then after Rule worked on showing us how many millions and millions of dollars this was going to be, and we should have started, years and years ago. That's when the transition to really thinking maybe we really can't do this, and maybe we should research buying credits. So,
and then Lou, also this was touched on relative to the impacts, the changes that could be made in the plant, then would be really worth it relative to reduction. So that if we weren't going to go the route of buying our way out of the problem, we might have to fix our way out of the problem with changes to the physical plant, to the power plant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
or
it's
it's a
gonna be
combination.
it's gonna be a combination of all of that. And so that's why, I've got a little model going where if I can get some policy input about what we think are the reasonable investments and where does that leave us related to carbon, then we can start to have a conversation in this group. But what I'm taking away from this is, sounds like our best departure point is that climate action inventory. And then maybe I need to kind of work with Marilyn about how we break that into some chunks, because I think what we want to do is have some, major strategies. So for example, I think it's a no-brainer that we're going to decarbonize the plant, or at least reduce the carbonization of the plant. I think that's not controversial at this point. And then identify those other major strategies where there's a good bang for the buck and see where that leaves us. I'm seeing a couple of nods.
Brian, I mean, you asked the question, I might not be phrasing it exactly the same way, but I think you said, who's managing this? And I think someone also mentioned about, converting that into action. And I'm going to set aside the power plant part, as sort of the big rock for a second. But some of those other things are relatively granular, like replacing glazing and lab efficiency. I saw that as one. And, it just strikes me that we need to take this and embed it in our daily work, right? That the portfolio managers and asset management are looking at, if we're going to do glazing replacement, for example, there'd be decisions to make about which glazing is in the worst shape or which would be most impactful to this goal. But we're trying to do 2 for 1, right? We're not just replacing glazing to reduce carbon. There's some glazing that needs to be replaced. And just being mindful of both of those things. Same with lab energy. There'd be commissioning and testing and balancing and other activities that would have to be done. But, that could be done in the context of other mechanical projects or improvements in buildings that we might want to do anyway. Right. So I'm just trying to say that I think there's a way to make progress almost in the course of our normal work that we need to make a habit, like that this is part of the screening for whether things get done or not. And I'm not sure that's the case right now. I think maybe different criteria are looked at as far as whether we're going to do A or B, but I'm not sure the carbon plan is part of those criteria right now in our normal daily work as we're doing it.
Yeah, Steve, as you were talking about this, it kind of reminds me of the work that we've done on our ADA strategy.
Yeah.
It was triggered by a lawsuit. We're under a consent decree to fix our parking lots. But as we built our strategy to take care of that requirement under the consent decree, we decided we needed to build a strategy to mitigate our risk, legal risk in the future, and operational risk for improving accessibility around the campus. But not dissimilar to reducing our carbon footprint, it's tens of millions of dollars, if not many tens of millions of dollars of effort that we are not going to do tomorrow or in the next 5 years. But we are on a strategy that is on paper, on our website, and we are measuring and tracking to the strategy that we've established. So I think we need that. And I think that's what, Brian, you're proposing. I think we have a lot of good work under our belt, but we need to build that strategy for carbon. And it's going to be multi-pronged, but we can kind of break it up into a dozen chunks and have a mini strategy for each of those elements that we track progress over time leading up to 2050. Yeah, this is doable by 2050, but we have to kind of start now and have a plan for all of those chunks.
I like the ADA analogy, Lou. Thank you. That's helpful. Sorry, I see Christoph, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just, thinking about this, the management piece of this and, wondering, we establish a carbon reduction strategy. How does that align with the sustainability action plan? Where are we connecting those pieces together? And then how are we managing both of those in tandem? Is a question, I guess.
I'm a huge believer in you want to simplify your plans. So I would not want to have two plans that people have to kind of like keep their heads going side to side. I'd want it aligned. So I think that would be, work we could do to figure out, well, how to bring that in. Because there's a lot of those targets are in there, carbon neutrality, but then there's that the strategies are not, that we've currently got, is, I guess they're called targets, are not sufficient to get there because there's some missing pieces. But a lot of the major elements are kind of in the plan. So I think it's a matter of getting, to Lou's point, a little more of a coherent strategy that lays it out all in one place.
Well, yeah, one more thought. I think this aligns with the earlier discussion on rechartering the Environmental Stewardship Committee. Maybe it's not the Environmental Stewardship Committee, but it's us. But again, who's in charge of this? Brian, you've taken a lot of great initiative and you're providing a lot of great leadership, but through our charter, maybe the charter for the Environmental Stewardship Committee, it would behoove us to have some kind of deliberate governance established on who's in charge of this, who's responsible for making progress. Maybe it's the ESC, I don't know, but.
I would try to utilize your existing structure, because again, easier to, rather than creating new stuff. So I'd try to load it up on your existing structure. And then I think the sustainability office, I'm happy to try to staff Maryland, but on the sort of quantitative part of it. But I think the sustainability office seems like they should be the heart of it. Christoph, I think you had your hand up before. So.
No, I was just,
something to add.
Yeah, it's just really that exact piece. We're already managing the plan, or trying to, through this committee, with oversight by the ESC as well. And that would make the most sense. But it was helpful to hear you say, yes, we should really combine this with the SAP. And I was imagining almost a way to do that might be to, with the existing 10 targets, then there's an additional, with the next action plan, a carbon section that calls out exactly the specifics of how we're doing that. So we're not, creating a whole new system. We're just sort of expanding the one we have, was all.
But is an example like an outgrowth of the strategy product would be, for example, a program to change the air change rate for the University of Washington's fume hood inventory, dial all these things down, and that would become a program not unlike the ADA program we have now to remedy deficiencies in parking lots, right? Is that an example of where the strategy would turn into an action that needs funding or becomes part of the work in some manner, right? The ADA parking lots has gotten funded intentionally. That's why it happens, so we had the metaphorical gun to our head there, but so this is a little different, but.
Well, we
anyway,
have that gun to our heads too. The state is, it's going to start costing it not to comply here. So I think Lou's ADA analogy is really good. And I think he needs a tool like he's got with the ADA to say, hey, here's our game plan. And therefore, here's what I need funding for.
Yeah.
Here's where we're going to take our risks and hope technology is better in 15 years. But, I think if we can give Lou a game plan, then he can be in better position to ask for resources or.
Yeah, again, we briefed, and we should brief every year, the regents on sustainability. As Claudia and I huddled and others huddled on how to leverage that opportunity, which we did in September, I believe. we decided to just make the brief somewhat narrow. And we focused on mandates that are out there for energy use intensity and climate on carbon reduction. And we got very specific in a couple of simple slides in a 12-minute brief that said, we're going to start paying $1 million a year, roughly, based on our estimates, you know, for if we don't get to this point, if we don't get to that point. Purpose was to just grease the skids and make sure that we elevate for awareness of Regent leadership and the executive office leadership that we've got to have a plan, and we're working on doing that. But you need to know that we're going to start getting pretty hefty fines per state law today.
Yeah, I'll admit my bias. I mean, for me, this is like no bigger issue facing the planet or the university in the long term. And so for me, this should be like a huge conversation at the board and the president. This shouldn't be a technical annual report out. There's huge policy issues here. There's huge financial issues. And man, I just think we need to be grappling with it in a much more visible way as an institution to deal with some of this. We're at 223. What I'd recommend, I think, Lou, if it's all right, I think I'm hearing is I could work with Marilyn and her team to sort of go back over the inventory and maybe bucket some key questions for this group about, well, okay, how much of a strategy is embedded in that thing and what's missing to sort of start to build the strategy out of that. So at the next meeting, I can come back with a little more specifics on how we pick up the trail from that document.
That sounds great to me, Brian.
I think that'll be well worth the time, and it'll make sure that things aren't slipping between the cracks, both practically and regulatory and past promises.
Let me add one more thing. It just popped into my head. I think this is understood, and I'm not trying to be provocative, but it's not an intent. It's an ignorance, or a better way to say it, it's awareness. There is an awareness at the leadership level that has driven a passion that you just articulated, Brian. So what we have to do, part of what we have to do, is market this. And that we've got to figure out a way to compel leadership to make a decision one way or the other. This is either something we stand for or it's not, and it's going to drive decisions and investment in the future. But that's our job, and it's part of it is a marketing / education job.
Yeah,
our next meeting will be in a month when we'll know who our next sustainability director will be. So then our office will have more capacity. And of course, I love the idea that it makes sense that our office would lead this effort and lead the communication effort. And there was one idea of the ESC being sort of the board to our office. And maybe we need to look closely at our office's capacity and if it needs to expand to be able to actually do this work effectively. I know I'm running as fast as I can, and we're of course short-staffed, and we'll have more once the new director comes on board. But just really look at what our office needs to have in place to do this as well as we want to.
Yeah, to reinforce that thought, Marilyn, absolutely, it's staffing and I would say it's probably or deliberate connection with other bodies of authority that have authority to help support this.
And if I could just throw out one teaser for you all next time, here is the date I got on the, thank you to Jekka, on the campus level emissions. And so I think one sub question that you all wanted to drill into a little bit is, to what extent are we putting a carbon strategy in place for each campus? Or do we just go after the big numbers on the page and say, well, gee, you know, we're not, UW-Tacoma it's not a big enough number, therefore we're not even going to deal with that. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, is that, you know, an approach you want to take? So for a future discussion, I think we'll want to hear from this group thoughts about Are we having a single campus strategy, or are we having a strategy for each individual campus? So that's just a teaser. Didn't look for an answer.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Great discussion.
Back to you, Marilyn. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, back to me. I think Damon's listed as the next steps person, but
Well, I
you
am,
have
but we haven't really
wrap up.
updated it. You've been kind of taking over these, so I think you're the one
Yeah.
that makes sense for
Okay.
now.
Next steps. So we already talked about next steps for working toward implementing those tweaks to the EC way of doing things. And then I have to look back at my notes, but I'm going to be talking to Brian about the follow-up on the carbon roadmap. I'll consolidate and simplify my notes and send them out. Yeah. Any obvious standouts that anyone's thinking about that I didn't list?
Just John's efforts to lead the Environmental Stewardship Committee.
Yes.
That can be a future agenda item for an executive committee meeting.
Mhm.
All right, well,
Thanks.
I think this was a great discussion today. Thanks for all
Mhm.
the participation.
Mhm.
All right, see y'all later.
Okay.
Yep.